This week's guest became tired of letting his mental illness dominate his life. This advocate has started to share his story to help others, and we are lucky to have him make time for us. I had originally met Andrew on social media in a writers group, and once I started to see him post a little more on the mental health side of things, I wanted to reach out to him. He has a personal journey to share, how he's overcome certain obstacles, and for this bonus episode of How Writing Helps on a Mental Health Break, we're going to learn all about this new book he put out. And with that, my name is Vincent Lanci. I want to thank you for tuning in to a Mental Health Break, where each week I sit down with a new mental health professional, advocate to share their story on mental health, share what worked well for them, share what didn't work well for them, but most importantly, what keeps them going. Once I came out of a coma, having suffered a traumatic brain injury, I realized I needed to prioritize my mental health. And slowly but surely, that led me to creating this awesome show because I get to sit down with great people like Andrew each week to share stories on their mental health. I mentioned he's been through a lot, so he has a lot to share, and he teaches us that it is okay to ask for help. Another great lesson from him already before we even get going is that giving up is never an option. Life does get extremely challenging for each of us, and it is easy to give up. But Andrew is here to share his story on this bonus episode of How Writing Helps to help you thrive. So with that, let me bring him on, Andrew Hicks. Andrew, thank you for making time to join us today.
A total pleasure, Vincent. Thanks so much for being such a supportive advocate for people who struggle with mental health, and for providing this awesome platform to break down the stigma and open up, avenues of recovery for people who desperately need it.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, Andrew. Would you mind giving our audience a little bit of an intro before we dive in, talk about your mental health, talk about the writing?
Yeah, for sure. We'll start with mental health, get to the writing a little bit later. I've been dancing with depression since at least my early teenage years. I'm 40 now, so I think it's safe to say I probably spent more of my life depressed than not. And the problem has been severely exasperated by addiction. Long before I picked up alcohol and then other drugs, I was a little kid who got hooked on dealing with unpleasant emotional states by overeating. And basically, what addiction means to me, it's a fortified pattern of running away from or numbing unpleasant emotional states. The pattern becomes so compelling, it's like the brain literally rewires itself to perpetuate the pattern, to keep it flowing. That's the nature of habit. But addiction is like a habit with some extra spice. It's a habit on a power trip. My first addictions were to junk food, video games, getting girls to like me, or trying to anyway. Then later I discovered nicotine, alcohol, cannabis, pills, psychedelics, dissociatives, weird sex, real-tail therapy. I don't know, spontaneously moving across the country to be with girls I met on the internet without even the slightest sensible plan to make it work financially. Yeah, I could keep going, but I think that's enough on that for the moment. But the relationship between depression and addiction is interesting. Both seem to come from the same source, and then they feed into one another in a perpetual cycle. The source from which they seem to have originated for me is this inner voice that says things like, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not able, I can't do anything right, I'm not lovable, I'm not sure who I am or if I matter. My feelings are not important, I am not important, but then I sure wish I could be important. So living with that obnoxiously talkative void inside is no easy feat, and it's really no mystery why shutting it down with food and substances and other behaviors is such a compelling temptation. Most substances and behaviors I've been dependent on had a numbing effect or at least served as a distraction. But the drugs that really hijacked my life took it a step further, made me feel important, capable, and invincible. So, what happens when someone that's always deep down felt like a nobody starts to feel like a god? It's like the short answer, it's like a roller coaster without seatbelts, and everyone who cares about you and plenty of people who hate you are forced along for the ride. But thankfully, recovery is possible and even inevitable for those who want it, need it, and are willing to redirect their perspective, focus, and behavior to any lengths necessary to get it. It's not easy. It's kind of simple, but it's not easy. It just requires new ways of thinking, which isn't easy, receptivity to new perspectives, tolerance of discomfort in general, and an acceptance of being a flawed human being in a lifelong process, patience, perseverance, humility, gratitude, and ultimately, what it boils down for me, the biggest turning points in my life, it was about getting out of my own way, basically. Um, Honestly, Vincent, recovery used to seem like a pain in the ass to me. I I had this thought process that was like, so I have to go from being a slave to addiction to being a slave to recovery. Uh, it took some time to see it, but that was fallacious. Recovery is it's my only shot at freedom, really. It's my only shot at having any kind of agency over my life. Um, it's the development, really, of the missing and broken parts of me that led to depression, and addiction to begin with. Um, it's the process that makes me as whole and free as I'll ever be in this sack of meat and stardust that I call a body.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all that. Sharing vulnerable moments helps everybody else listening on realize that they are not alone. You mentioned the depression and addiction, they're going coinciding with each other, rather. When did you realize that you were first going to take a stance on mental health advocacy and start using your voice after, I guess, you've had enough, like you said?
Yeah, good question. Um, it's kind of hard to pinpoint an exact moment because there's like a process of. I think it. I think it kind of started by accident. Back in my 20s, I was in the habit of blogging nearly every day on LiveJournal, if anyone remembers that one. Um, and I didn't really have any noble intentions with that at first, but I really let it all hang out. So I kind of developed like a tendency for transparency. And I think back then, the reason it was so effortless to be transparent was because I felt very broken, alone, and somehow unique in a negative way. But when I put myself out there like that and people responded to it, I felt less alone, still broken, but at least not so alienated. Um, then as I got older, being an open book on the internet became somewhat less about my own validation, although I still do like those Instagram likes, but um, it's more about finding words for important aspects of the human condition that many people are uncomfortable talking about.
Yep.
And then putting those words out there to show others that they're not alone, inviting them to talk about these scary things with me and others who relate. I think society has progressed nicely over the past couple of decades in terms of making space for people to generate conversation.
Slowly but surely. Yep.
Exactly, around like mental illness, addiction, and other factors that kind of arrest our development, are linked to so much baggage. But like slowly but surely, like you say, we're not where we need to be. And so I kind of think that like those of us who are willing and able to be transparent kind of have a responsibility to do so, if that's something that we're willing to take on our shoulders. And it's not like a huge burden, really. There's a lot of beautiful things that come from it.
Yep.
It's not just for the benefit of helping us realize we're not as alone as we feel, although that's definitely a factor, but it also generates discourse and builds like bridges of understanding between like we who struggle with mental illness and addiction and those who care and want to know what we're going through and how they can show their love and support,
Mhm.
which is also part of what leads to societal change as well. Um, so sometimes I've stepped back from transparency, becoming, temporarily opaque. It's usually out of like guilt or shame or embarrassment, hopelessness, whatever else. But for me, transparency always seems to come back around in the end. It's just kind of how I'm wired at this point.
Right.
Uh, it does cause a few problems here and there, but mostly it seems to do more good than otherwise. I hope so, anyway.
Well, you mentioned before talking. Talking came up a few times, talking about how we're feeling. That's something that definitely works for me as a short term and long term way to improve my mental health. I have the unique opportunity to host a series where I basically have a therapy session each episode because we're talking about mental health. But if you don't mind sharing with our audience, Andrew, what are some things that work for you, short term or long term?
Okay. Yeah, I got a few things for you there.
Excellent.
But I got two long term and two short term. Sound good?
Sounds excellent.
All right, awesome. These come from like the front lines of my recovery. These are the things that have kept me alive through it and have helped me be resilient enough to bounce back from it.
Mhm.
Um, One of the long term ones. Um, be patient with your process and appreciative about your progress. Just a metaphor. If you are at 500 miles of a 1,000-mile road trip, you're demanding and pressuring yourself to already be at the end of the trip. Uh, what good comes from that? Not much, right? Not only would your demands be unrealistic and impossible in the immediate sense, but it'd also be missing out like on the beauty that's all around you right now. Probably forgetting to be grateful for like the sense of progression you could have relished in up to this point.
Mhm.
And plus, if you're not
Enjoying the
present,
process.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
agree with you
yeah.
there.
It's like when I haven't been present and thinking clearly, in the 500 miles analogy there, I might run out of gas in the middle of nowhere and have to walk 50 miles backwards to the nearest service station. That's pretty much a pretty good illustration for what happened to me over there.
I mean, it paints a very vivid picture and it's deep, but that's exactly what needs to be said, Andrew. I'll put it like that. People battle uphill battles, is what you just described. And you're living proof that there is sunshine on the other side.
Yeah, you get it, man. You definitely get it. I think what it comes down to is like real sustainable change usually takes a lot longer than we expect.
Yep.
So about leaning into the process, being thankful for how far we've come, and maybe even sometimes being open to ending up in a different place than we envisioned when we started.
Right.
Um, so a second long term, um, to really witness the cumulative effects of long term change, it comes down to habits. Like I used to have a real big aversion to building structure and habits. Like it was just very hard for me to do. But as I get older, I see the necessity of it, and I also see the joy and fulfillment that comes from successfully developing positive habits. It's like habits are like the vehicle for that 1,000-mile road trip. Um, it's like, will your habits take you the distance, or will your car break down along the way?
Excellent analogy. Yeah.
It's like thank you. The most practical information I've ever encountered about habit formation was in a book by an author named Selena Fang. I'm foggy on the exact wording, but the meaning always really stuck with me. Habits are built from momentum, not willpower. And willpower is built from consistency, not zealousness. So, like, every time I went from doing yoga 0 minutes per morning to zealously jumping into an hour-long daily practice, I was trying to build it out of willpower, and it didn't work like at all.
Right.
So instead, maybe 15 to 20 minutes of yoga each morning. It's easier to be more consistent that way, and then the momentum builds, and that's what leads to it becoming a habit. And then the habit can be built on an attitude later, but there has to be like a strong foundation first. Um, And one more resource on habit formation I love is the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. That book blew my mind all over the place. It really changed my perception on how to develop habits. But let's get into the short term.
Yeah, I want to just say there too what you mentioned, progress, not going for the full hour, go for 20 minutes. I stress that about everything. Micro goals, where when I was meditating, I had unrealistic goals for it. I expected this crazy magic potion drug type thing, and it just wasn't for me at first. But I started just doing a few minutes, and that's just what works for me when I do choose that outlet. A great message in there is that everyone is different. Do what works for you. Don't feel stressed to do something just because other people are doing it for X amount of time. What works for some doesn't work for everyone. Soon we're going to get into the writing side of things and how writing helps Andrew, where it may actually be able to be beneficial for you too.
Yeah, meditation is a perfect example for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Meditating for 5 minutes every day has more benefits than like meditating once every 3 months for an hour, you know. The short term. Okay, so this one's might be a little bit controversial. I really was like thinking about if I wanted to mention this, but I do. I think that it could be really important for some listeners. It's also I want to give a trigger warning. It's tip is a person for or it's a tip for a person who is, first of all, seriously considering ending their own life, but secondly, who doesn't feel like they'd call a suicide hotline, like not in a million years. Um, that that was my situation in 2018, and it got to the point of like me researching methods of suicide with the highest probability of success and lowest factors of suffering. I know it's morbid and sensitive. I'll just bear with me for a sec, please. My research brought me to an internet forum called Sanctioned Suicide. It's a place that's safe for people to have conversations about suicide without anyone like jumping into well-intended platitudes about how staying alive is worth it because you have so much to live for, or suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, or about how selfish suicide is and how it's traumatic to those who love us. Now, I'm not disputing the validity of any of those statements at all. It's just, it can feel very dismissive and invalidating to someone who has suffered and been stuck for so long and doesn't have any hope left.
I could see that.
I was so deep in my depression that in my eyes, the people who wanted me to stay alive were inhumane and selfish for expecting me to endure my life anymore. And I also thought that me being gone would make their lives better. And again, I'm not saying these thoughts were accurate at all, but they were my one and only reality at the time. And I needed people to meet me where I was at, to hear what I was saying without like arguing or correcting me, and to pretty much help me feel like they get it and know how it felt. And that's what Sanctioned Suicide did for me, connected me with others who were like at my vibration and restored my ability to relate and open up and listen. And it really saved my life. So I would say for someone who's adamant about ending their life, maybe spend a few weeks on a forum like Sanctioned Suicide and just remember the value of connection with other people who relate to you. And, if someone was still adamant about ending their life after that, I wouldn't be able to stop you. I wouldn't even be able to hold it against you, though my heart would hurt for you. And it actually already does if you're standing on that ledge that's so familiar to me. Mm-hmm. Being human is ridiculously hard. The more thoughtful, deep thinking, and sensitive you are, the harder life can get, especially if you've always kind of marched your own beat. But it's the deep thinkers and seekers among us. They have the potential to make the future a more tolerable, fair, less contradictory, less polarized, and insane realm to live in. So maybe people in the future won't have to go through what we went through as much as we have. But we have to keep ourselves alive long enough and learn how to walk in our authentic personal power. And
incredibly well said. Yeah.
I just want to say one more thing about that. It's like anyone who wants to die, I don't see them as selfish. I see them as used up and spent. I get it. I love you and I believe in you and I accept your decision about whether you live or die, but it would be pretty badass if you lived. Uh, and then someone who is suicidal and is willing to call a hotline. I just want to drop the suicide prevention lifeline number. It's 1-800-273-8255. And then one barrier that sometimes people face when they're that depressed is they don't want to call someone and talk on the phone. So you can even text the lifeline at just 741-741. And that can be like, if you're willing to do it, then, by all means, it's a great resource put together by people who genuinely care about what you're going through. And then just another quick short-term tip on the lighter side of things. I'd say just find a little way to get like one little ray of sunshine into your day, one little ray of inspiration. Like I used to always listen to music when I went for a walk. I still do a lot of the times, but used to usually be like angry or cathartic music. But like rumination only goes so far. So like listening to a TED talk or uplifting audiobook or a podcast while going for a walk, like, a mental health break, for instance, it's becoming something of a revelation for me. And definitely if you're feeling downtrodden, read one of Vincent's books, listen to an episode of one of his podcasts. He has so much great material out there. I've been swimming around in it lately. And Vincent, you've been something of an angel to me through my recent struggles. And I know that like your presence and your experience and just the like what you're doing with your past to help other people, like I think that it speaks volumes of your ability to just be a beacon of inspiration and encouragement to many people. And I want others to know about that because you are a mental health resource and it's pretty amazing. So thank you.
For that. Very kind of you to say. And I'm just me. When I see people who need a conversation, I reach out, which is what, I saw you were going through a tough time, and I'm glad to see how far you've come. It's a testament to that. If you put your mindset to something, good things happen. You gave incredible positivity on those who are contemplating, or I shouldn't say contemplating suicide, but it's crossed their mind. Please be strong. Use those resources that he's provided for you. I'm very grateful you did. And before we get into the spotlight story, I would like to touch on Andrew's book. He came out with a book. He'll be writing about it. I mean, we were just talking about him writing. What do you got for us, Andrew?
Okay. Well, the book's not out yet. It's in development. Well, there is a book out, but it's not really that pertinent to current events. It's a 366 day. I used to say 365, but I don't want to leave people hanging on the leap years. Recovery meditational, pardon my language, but it's called Just for Right Fucking Now. I started writing it while I was struggling with active addiction and was desperately trying to wrangle myself back into recovery. I wrote in my journal every day the words that I most needed to hear. The common recovery trope is that we only have to stay clean just for today, just this one 24-hour period. But for me, 24 hours was like overwhelming. All I could manage was one right now at a time. And I was a little grumpy, so one effing right now at a time, basically. But this book will be a valuable resource for people in early or pre-recovery who may have problems with the mentalities and slogans they encounter in mutual aid groups like 12-step programs, smart recovery. There's all kinds of programs. And like sometimes when people come into those programs, their preconceptions make it very difficult to understand the value of those programs. And so this book is kind of a love letter to those people, to help people get their bearings when they're coming to terms with what addiction and recovery mean to them. It'll be out in mid-2022. I'll announce the release date pretty shortly. And then I also wanted to mention another avenue of advocacy and education that I'm opening up. Thank you. It's starting with a Zoom workshop that I'll be running on Saturday, August 14th 2021, based around an amazing breathing technique that's really changed my life called Pico Pico Still Point Breath. The ability to self-regulate stress is kind of a superpower in our modern society. Probably it's always been a superpower, really. But Pico Pico does exactly that. It's really easy for anyone to learn and integrate into their own toolbox for life and mental health maintenance. And the workshop's like a start of a series of online self-empowerment courses for people in recovery.
Awesome.
Also helping professionals who want to teach their clients useful skills, and anyone who seeks essential tools for empowered, balanced living. And then I'll also continue doing a lot of writing and being an open book on social media to make difficult conversations accessible and continue chipping away at stigmas around mental health and addiction.
Well, that was an amazing preview, and it got me excited. So everybody listening on, stick around to the end of the episode. We'll find out how to get in touch with Andrew, how to follow his endeavors so you can stay up to date on his release. And that is when we will bring him back for a bonus episode of How Writing Helps. We're going to talk all things about the book, how writing helps his mental health journey, a little more detail, and so much more. But now, with the writing preview he just gave, we're going to jump into the spotlight story this week, and we're going to look into Ernest Hemingway as we have a writer on the show. These stories are meant to let you know that you are not alone. He was described as a charming American novelist that wrote best-selling books and won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1954. I learned he struggled with manic depression and alcoholism, and many failed to know the extent of which mental illness and alcoholism ran in his family. This may be useful for some people listening on. His dad, sister, brother all committed suicide. He actually received electroshock therapy many times, but it was only providing short-term relief for him. His depression hit worse levels over time, and in 1961, he did take his own life as well. In 2013, his granddaughter made a documentary called Running from Crazy that reveals the impact mental illness had on her entire family. I have not seen this, but think I need to try to stream it somehow. Andrew, what's your takeaway from his story on mental health?
Well, it makes me think about how we never really know what people are going through. It's like we see the tip of the iceberg. It's like when people achieve great accomplishments, such as timeless works of literature. It's like we never really know the depths of struggle, suffering, and chaos that had to be endured in order to achieve those things. And that said, no one really knows the depths of what you and I are going through either. Sometimes being human is a very lonely and alienating affair. It's like, even if we had the words for everything we've been through, no one but us really knows what it was like. And then sometimes even my own memory is foggy and distorted. But it's like, here we are now, still alive, living our truths. And I believe that humans are meant for connection. Connection's not really automatic necessarily, especially for people who tend to self-isolate. It takes vulnerability, bravery, and the willingness to risk rejection, tolerate discomfort.
That's the truth.
But even those of us who've struggled with the most brutal forms of mental illness can still find connection in the world, especially if we keep breaking down the stigma and carving out new avenues to increase accessibility to resources. And, I've never seen Running from Crazy either, but it sounds poignant, and I've definitely taken a note to check into that when I get a chance to.
Me as well. Thank you for a great analogy right there. And for an entire episode, Andrew, I can't thank you enough. I'm glad we finally made time. 2 busy schedules. We came together after at least a month or two of trying to make it work. You shared your vulnerable moments and you shared how you recovered. I'm looking at you now. You're smiling. You came a long way. And it just, again, I said it before, but I'll say it again. Each person that comes on is a testament to you, the listeners, that your dark day can turn into a bright day just like that. But you have to take steps in the right direction. He brought up a lot of useful tools today. Be sure to repeat this episode. And before I ask him for his contact info, I got to ask him for his last word.
Okay. First of all, My cat Turbo really likes your voice. I think he wants to say hi.
There he
He's
is.
he's been he's been very curious about you since this started. Um, I actually want to give a shout out to someone real quick.
Please.
She's a spunky and wonderful visionary of a person named Fabienne, and she has built a very lively and barrier breaking community that is called Empowered Living. And I think that she is someone to be keeping an eye on as a resource to really help maybe people who march to their own beat, like get to the next level of their lives. Because sometimes people who march to their own beat are they're kind of geniuses, but not so much sometimes about functioning in society. But Fabienne, I think, provides some very valuable resources I've been learning a lot from. She teaches online courses and manages a vibrant Facebook group. Yeah, Turbo the cat keeps distracting me, but
Hey, he's got a good cat or a
he,
good guy.
he's a wonderful cat. He just yeah, doesn't have much of an idea of what's going on right now.
Well, tell the great people who listen to this podcast how they can get in touch with your cat and, of course, you.
Yeah, well, my cat's a little shy. That's why I had to hold him up. But um, I just wanted to say before I get to my contact information, yeah, Fabienne's just one of the most interesting, powerful, and beautiful souls that I've met. And you can find like a portal to her content through her Instagram bio, which is her Instagram username is Fabienne Egger 9, which is FABIENNEEGGER and then 9. Yeah, and I also just want to thank your listeners
Absolutely.
for being who you are. You're beautiful, and it's amazing that you've chosen to use your time in this constructive way today. You could be doing anything, but you're listening to a podcast that has the potential to, help you be empowered. So, yeah, that's a beautiful thing, and I'm thankful for this opportunity, Vincent. So as far as contacting me goes, my website is andrewlhicks.com. There's a blog there. There's info about my books, signups for upcoming workshops. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram as Andrew L. Hicks Writes. And on Twitter, I'm just Andrew L. Hicks. And if you engage with me on Twitter, I'll actually have an excuse to use it. What a concept. But yeah, that, as they say, is that.
Well, Andrew, I want to thank you again for coming on. It's been a pleasure to host you. And with that, I want to encourage you to check out the show while you're checking out his great content. We're at A Mental Health Break on all major social media platforms, except on Twitter, we're Podcasts by Lanci. So you have updates from all 4 shows. My handles are at Vincent A. Lanci on all social media and YouTube. And my website is vincentalanci.com. Be sure to check out my mental health books. We have Mental Health Week for your elementary school age students and Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health for all ages above. Thank you for tuning in for another powerful episode, and we'll see you next week on A Mental Health Break.
Thank you, Vincent. Have a great one.
You too, Andrew.